The following program contains scenes and language of a frank and explicit nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome to Film Jitsu, the podcast that wields films like deadly weapons. We are your hosts. I am Jay.
And I am Mike.
On this episode, Mike solves the following riddle. What 1984 box office bomb brings together the author of Jurassic Park, Robot Spiders, the star of Magnum P.I., Smart Bullets, the bassist from the band Kiss, Smart Bombs, and the actress who played Rebecca from Cheers? If you said Runaway, then like Mike, you know way too much about awful movies. Listen as he regales us with his views on this cinematic stinker, and then stick around while we, in honor of the majesty that is Tom Selleck's upper lip, list off our bottom 5 mustaches. After that, we'll play a round of Kick 2, Pick 2, and finally, we'll end our show with Mike drinking from a chalice full of sweet, sweet revenge as he assigns me the next movie I'll have to watch for our next episode. But before all that happens, let's travel way into the future to the year 1991 and roll the trailer for Michael Crichton's Runaway.
It is the future. Machines trained to serve humans are turning against them. Runaway. Tom Selleck, Cynthia Rhodes, Gene Simmons. From TriStar Pictures.
Mike, I have to be honest with you. I remember very little about Runaway, or at least I did remember little of it, but then I quickly snuck in a viewing right before the show.
I love that you do this. The whole point of this show is to make each other watch garbage, and I love how often you watch the bad movie just because. I don't do that. I'm like, no, fuck you. You're watching this. I'm not. Like, that's the whole point. And you, like a true champion, are like, I'm going to watch it anyway.
Oh, man. I remembered liking it, so I wanted to see if I still liked it, and spoiler alert, I didn't. So, but like you, I recall Gene Simmons was in it playing some like completely over-the-top maniac named Luther. I also, of course, knew that Tom Selleck and his mustache were on board, with him playing some sort of like Blade Runner type cop, and his mustache being even more glorious and widescreen than it was in the confines of Magnum P.I.'s 4:3 television ratio.
Right, yeah.
I also remembered that Kirstie Alley was looking way too much like Meg Foster for me to know the difference between them. And then, of course, I kind of remembered that there were a whole bunch of really lousy special effects. So was there anything I didn't remember that was worth recall?
It really is like a 1980s Mad Libs when you put it that way, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
It's bananas. You really actually kind of captured everything that there is worth talking about for this movie, because there are all of those things. This movie was made in 1984, but set in 1991, the good old days when lady cops still wore skirts to work. This futuristic movie, this is what Michael Crichton, the sci-fi writer who foretold an awful lot of stuff. We're going to talk about that in this episode. There's a lot of really interesting technology that Crichton writes into this script, but I couldn't help but notice almost immediately that as much as he could envision this techno future, he still imagines lady cops wear skirts to work. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The misogyny was still strong in this one in a major way, right up through the ending.
We didn't get rid of big shoulder pads. We didn't get rid of giant Tom Selleck mustaches. We didn't get rid of
teased hair.
But so much other things. This movie is what I think passes as a techno thriller in the year 1984 that it was made. And I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of what Crichton put into the film, what he was trying to do to make this vision of the near future. That was the thing that I think was interesting. It wasn't one of these big sci-fi epics with flying cars and stuff. It was a not too distant future from when the film was made. And he envisioned a few things that weren't around in 1991, but came along shortly thereafter. right? We had things like drones that are flying around and taking video. There are tablet computers. There's Ring doorbells and video conference calls and all kinds of these little things along the way that were interesting to see. Some of them very dumb, like the POV flying missile bullet thing that is
smart
like
bullets.
The smart bullet in this thing. Okay, so let's back up. We have Tom Selleck as Ramsey, the cop who I think his entire job is he chases battle bots for a living, I think.
So true.
You were far too kind to, I think, name drop Blade Runner. If Blade Runner had a really, really distant inbred cousin, it would be Runaway. That might be it.
Blade Runner, they're tracking down synthoids, right? Like that are robots. And here he is tracking down these things called runaways, which are robots. So, I mean, I drew a line connecting them. It's just that, yes, you're absolutely right. This is the backwoods version of it.
It is funny the targets that this film misses, because while it does envision some of these technologies, the robots are all big and clunky and dumb.
They look so dumb.
Crichton thinks that in the future, along with these other things, we're going to have actual big physical robots that do chores and run the household, and sometimes they're spiders that kill people. And none of that has quite happened. Instead, we're getting Alexa and Siri and AI, and all of these technologies are in our other devices, not these big clunky robots. Jay, I am pretty sure at one point that I saw a Lexmark dot matrix printer that was spray painted gray. And I'm also really confident that there was a Hoover canister vacuum that had legs attached to it. That's what this movie was working with.
That's exactly right. That's how I viewed it too. There was a scene, the first scene, where he has like this meet cute with Kirstie Alley's character, and she's being held sort of hostage by this, it looks like a Xerox machine that's just happens to have a taser attached to it, and it tases Selleck a few times. And he ends up putting it down by throwing his coat over it.
Yeah, like it's a squirrel that got in the house.
Yeah, exactly. And then he slams it with a chair, WWE style.
I'm so glad that you mentioned this, because not a week ago at work, a chipmunk got into the building from an open patio door. And so myself and an employee of mine had to chase this thing down the hallway and throw a blanket over it and haul it out of there, which it turns out is the same law enforcement tactics being utilized in Runaway's futuristic 1991. I couldn't help but laugh when I was watching the movie. I was like, wow, okay, that's just like the chipmunk. Thank God that chipmunk didn't have lasers.
You gave it the Selleck.
I did, a full Selleck. And what would Tom Selleck be without a villain to play off of? And in this movie, we get Gene Simmons as Luther, an evil guy who seems to be extra evil. And this movie hints all over the place, that he might be supernaturally evil, but it never commits to that idea. It never even advances the idea beyond sort of implying it. It's almost like the production was so caught up in the fact that Gene Simmons from Kiss was in their movie that they were kind of creeped out by him. So they made the character supernaturally creepy, but he doesn't have any special powers. We don't know anything about his background or who he is or why he's the way he is. He's just kind of creepy. And that seems to be his superpower.
He was the demon in Kiss. So I think they just didn't know what else to do with him. He is so over the top and yet has nothing going on. It's the weirdest dichotomy I've seen in any actor, truthfully, where he looks like he's your run-of-the-mill lawyer extra of a movie.
Yeah.
But he's constantly in close-up with heavy lids, talking in a monotone, and just looks like he's seething, but there's nothing in the eyes. Like, it is very, very strange.
This movie's trying so hard to not be awesome. It's
actually so true.
It's somehow impressive. From the special effects to the casting to the script.
You have to be very careful with these chips, Dr. Luther. They're very dangerous.
I know they are. That's why they're so valuable.
Valuable to whom?
Oh, the mafia, terrorist organizations, foreign agents, anyone who will offer me the most money.
I think to your point, how bad it manages to be, despite having some really cool ideas, is best represented by the first real action sequence in the movie, which is when there's a robot running rampant inside a home with a pistol, and there's a baby crying, and Tom Selleck has to sneak his way into the house and get close to the robot so he can take it down. And then a news camera guy comes in and he ends up getting shot, and it ups the stakes. And the whole thing is pretty suspenseful and kind of interesting. And then you see the robot. And it looks like one of those little automatic vacuum cleaners that goes around the floor, but with a little arm that's holding the world's oldest gun.
You're right. Yeah.
Like a little pistol.
There are so many moments like that. This film is full of set pieces and ideas and concepts that should be awesome, but it can't do it. It's like it can't. It can't do it.
It's like you picked out the smart bullet, where they try to do like a Raimi cam and go first person with the bullet as it tracks down. Oh, awful.
Awful.
Our first show that we did for this run of Film Jitsu was about reboots.
Yep.
And honestly, as I was watching this, I kept thinking to myself, I wouldn't mind to see this remade. I would think this would be kind of fun.
Yeah, thank you. I don't need remakes of big, well-known, successful films updated for our modern time. But when you pluck some of those obscure movies and remake them with new ideas, new technology, you could have a film there. There is real potential for the movie Runaway, but it's like they forgot to put the salt and pepper in the pot when they made the movie.
Yes, absolutely.
The whole thing is bland. I'll tell you what it's like.
is.
I came away, I figured it out by the end. This whole film is like an episode of Knight Rider, but without all the cool car shit and just about the handsome cop investigating 1980s financial crimes perpetrated by guys who got good at computers just a few years before everybody else. That's the plot of almost every Knight Rider episode.
It's true.
They're always just kind of like semi-wealthy assholes with a decent modem for the time that the movie is happening. And that is this movie. So instead of all the fun of a Knight Rider episode with flying cars and shit, we get these goofy, like, jingly jangly spider bots. Which, Jay, I don't know. Tom Selleck deserves an Oscar, honestly, for pulling off even the closest idea that maybe one of these things poses a threat to anyone. It's like in an Ed Wood movie when they have to wrestle around with the big rubber octopus and make it look like it's alive. That's basically what the guy's doing here. It's absurd because
they look like they're made of balsa wood that's painted and to look like metal.
With these little like jingly jangly legs so that it can't turn. It can only kind of like skitter to the side.
It looks like they're hiding the bottom that you would twist to make them go.
That's right. Yeah, there's probably a spring somewhere. So we get a few of these things. They have needles that they can, I think they...
Yeah, they're like syringes that come out and they shoot acid. There was actually a really cool shot when he was up high near the end of the movie and he was in that elevator and they were all kind of crawling up. Yeah. And there was one that sprayed his face. Mm-hmm. It was a really cool shot. You could see like sizzling on his face.
Yep.
And I was impressed. I was like, okay, I don't know how they did that, but that was cool. What's interesting too is the inconsistency with the way these things, and this drives me crazy when I watch this in movies, the inconsistency of the way things murder somebody, right? Mm-hmm. These little killer spider things kill a woman earlier on in the film. And it's kind of an amazing sequence, to be perfectly honest. It like injects her under the chin.
Yeah.
And then she's like in a bathroom stall. Another cop comes in to save her and she explodes and the cop catches fire and falls back.
Yep.
But then at the very end, it's just like they spark a whole bunch and they turn into smoke bombs. It was...
I will say a real treat for this guy. Two things, honestly.
Okay.
The Flight of the Navigator kid as Bobby the son.
I know. I actually thought you said something a little bit about the cast, but seeing that Joey Kramer was in this really sent me for a loop.
Yeah.
Because he really didn't do a lot of stuff. But interestingly, I looked it up. And in 2021, he started acting again after something like a 35-year hiatus.
Well, he fell on hard times, right? I think there were drugs and jail. I think like a lot of child actors of the 80s. I think I think he ran afoul of the law. He may have been runawayed a few times himself. I don't know.
Oh no.
So there was that. I was pleased to see Joey Kramer.
Yeah.
That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
I actually wished that they had done a little bit more with him because the scenes that he and Selleck have are kind of fun. There's a part when they're back at the house and Selleck's partner comes over, this lady cop with her skirt, and the son starts giving him a hard time about whether or not she slept over or not. Like he's used to his dad having ladies over the house and they have kind of a laugh about it.
I mean, if your dad had that mustache.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So there was that. I also genuinely enjoyed Tom Selleck dropping F-bombs in a film.
I know.
I
was shocked by that. He was good.
He was
good. He was good.
He was fine. But that's the thing. It was like watching Magnum P.I., except without all the lighthearted, roguish joking. Like, who wants serious Magnum P.I.? Like Magnum P.I. who takes his job seriously?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Well, I mean, I don't know how serious this movie really was. G.W. Bailey was the goddamn police chief. Captain Harris from the goddamn Police Academy movie shows up tearing him a new asshole every scene he's in.
And we got 2 wounded, one of them your own partner, and we got 2 dead guinea punks, and nobody knows why or what the hell it's all about.
I know what it's about.
Again, it's like 1980s Mad Libs. It really is.
It really is. But I gotta say, I really liked Cynthia Rhodes as his partner.
I wish the script had respected her a little bit more and
for
given her a little bit more to do because even in that final action sequence at the end, she's in like a floral print dress and heels the whole time.
Ridiculous.
So she's coming to the rescue. She is saving Tom Selleck and the kid. She's going to be the one that finally helps them overcome Luther, who, by the way, just before we get away from this movie has a scene where there's a psychic at the police precinct who tells Ramsey that he and Luther were brothers in a past life. What the fuck, movie?
There's
what are
your
we
supernatural.
I was like, what? Huh? And it explores that none, by the way, after that. We have this hint that Luther is super evil. Apparently, they just have psychics hanging out at the police station in 1991, and that's it. So we have this big bad character, and she shows up to save the day in the most 80s dress you've ever seen. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Come on.
That is ridiculous. And the whole way that they wrap up those 2 characters at the very end with a kiss scene that's so long that it goes through the entirety of the credits while they're having sparks raining down all over them. Totally unnecessary and lacking the kind of restraint that you were talking about and praising Twisters for having.
Yeah, sure.
Here is the absence of that restraint.
Yeah.
Complete. You're right. She's awfully written, but I really did like her as a performer.
Sure.
And she has probably the best scene in the movie where she gets one of those smart bullets embedded in her arm.
Yep.
And if they move her the wrong way, it's gonna detonate and blow her arm off. And Selleck decides he's gonna be the one that removes it because they don't have the special machine. G.W. Bailey's got both hands up his ass. He has no idea what he's doing. So it was a great moment in this film. And I think that one of the things I wanted to talk to you about with this film is partly this technology, right? Partly these kind of cool ideas that they came up with. But Runaway, like Escape from New York or Back to the Future 2, they imagine a world in the future that we've now lived through.
Right.
So some people call this like retrofuturism, but that's more of a stylistic movement. Like it's almost like imagining the future with like steampunk. Imagining a future with a certain kind of style that's from the past. What did you actually feel about that look forward as far as things go?
I was impressed. I think this is Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton, as a science fiction writer, he got a lot of stuff right.
Mm-hmm.
When you really break it down, there's a lot of technology in this movie that in some version or another we have now.
Yeah.
And so I was impressed with how much this movie managed to foresee, especially in terms of things like tablets and video conferences and that kind of thing. A lot of the like the personal device kind of stuff, hilariously offset by the big giant robots that it got wrong. But there were a lot of those little things that this movie does get right. I think that everything about this movie feels small.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like not enough.
It's not world building.
It's not even Judge Dredding us through this thing. This isn't even Demolition Manning us. It just kind of plops us into 1991 as if we are taking for granted that all of these technologies exist. We don't see the world outside this story at all. And I think that's a real problem, because I think if they had taken a little bit of time to flesh out what is a society where robots are autonomous, but sometimes malfunction and run amok. And now we have this police force where we have to get these runaways. There's nothing done with the idea of runaway. We should see this like division of the police force, and this, maybe that would be a different movie. I'm not sure. But again, I can't help but layer on a good movie to this idea and sort of make it in my own head about what this film should or could be. I don't like to keep talking about past episodes necessarily, but I couldn't help but think of how this movie, with a Sandra Bullock and a Keanu Reeves in the lead role, and some capable directing, could give us something like a Minority Report or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And this could be a really good movie. I think Minority Report is actually a pretty good counterpoint for something like this. It's a movie that is set in the future, envisions some different kind of technologies, but that's a movie that really builds out the consequences of this future techno society in a way that Runaway never bothers to do, and we just get all of this 80s gobbledygook.
Yeah, I feel you're right. I think that that's the ultimate failure of Runaway, is that it is so myopic. There is nothing going on beyond the frame. Mm-hmm. And if it is anything, it's 1984.
Yeah.
It never sells the future, and it never builds the world out. I kept thinking about Blade Runner because really, here we are 2 years prior to this thing coming out, and you've got this opus world building, incredible. The robots look like humans and everything. Everything is very stylized, right? Not everything was CRT screens. And even when they were, it was somehow acceptable. But here, everything looked like a wall of VCRs, you know? Like, and not even the VCRs near the end, like the really big top loader clunky ones with orange buttons, you know, like that kind of thing. Like Betamax, you know?
But holding a pistol. Always holding a pistol.
Always.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Mike, thanks so much for giving us such a great review of Runaway. I think my choice was very silly, very, very goofy for this one. As far as I typically don't go super goofy with my choices for bottom fives, but this one was an immediate thought, and I thought it could be a fun topic. Bottom 5 mustaches, in honor of Tom Selleck, who absolutely, I want to say up front, has a positively iconic mustache. This is in celebration of his mustache. We are not poo-pooing his mustache under any circumstances. I don't want hate mail for this. Tom Selleck is a gorgeous, gorgeous man. The only time that he wasn't was when he removed the mustache for movies like, I think it was Dave, and I think The Love Letter he did. Good heavens. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
But with that said, what was your approach here with bottom 5 mustaches? Was there an approach?
Well, I don't know if there was a specific strategy here. I just kind of thought about mustaches for a while. What I will say is that I discovered in thinking about this topic, and really what else could it have been, right? Cinema gives us some pretty epic face furniture.
Yeah.
We have a long tradition in American movies of highlighting and celebrating the upper lip. We have Errol Flynn's pencil mustache in The Adventures of Robin Hood, the dental drapes of the American Westerns. to right off to whatever the fuck Kenneth Branagh was doing in that Haunting in Venice movie from a couple of years ago. We have always had a fascination with lip luggage, but it has not always been great. And so while I was able to come up with a lot of examples of really great movie mustaches, this was a little bit harder. And so I'm actually interested to hear your number 5, because I want to know what you were able to kind of pluck from the mustachio depths of cinema history.
Well, I started my number 5 in a kind of very personal place, all right? I don't know what happened on the set of the 80s buddy cop comedy show, Simon and Simon.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a part of me that thinks that Gerald McRaney somehow duped his co-star, Jameson Parker, into believing that he, like McRaney, could base a career on a finely sculpted upper lip.
Mm-hmm.
Because you see, there were 2 Simons, one with a stash and one without. McRaney, of course, was with, as anyone who watched Major Dad as a kid would know.
Yeah.
So Parker grew a mustache, and then it became the single most disturbing thing in horror meister John Carpenter's 1987 flick, Prince of Darkness. This movie is filled with all sorts of vile stuff, including a dude that melts into bugs, a blonde lady with no skin, and a dude who shoves a sharp end of a wooden slat into his neck. But yeah, none of that matters, because every time we see Jameson Parker's goofy ass on screen, he's rocking the most distracting facial hair this side of Deep Throat. Maybe it's the color? Light-haired dudes do not look good with mustaches. Imagine like William Catt or Christopher Atkins or Luke Wilson in their prime with stashes. It's like a big no.
Or like, it didn't make my list, but Ben Stiller in Dodgeball with the like feathered
with the blonde right
handlebar mustache. Yeah.
And it's made intentionally bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he looks terrible. He appears too uptight because it's too perfectly manicured. You feel as though he just spends way too much time looking in the mirror to really care about anyone else in the film. And that's really the problem with the movie. You anchor this crazy situation with an anti-god that's escaped via some green slime from a centuries-old Yeti thermos, and we don't care because he looks like a goddamn fool with that thing on his lip. Fuck.
I guess when I got out of bed this morning, I didn't think we'd be talking about Simon and Simon at any point in the day, so we've achieved at least that much. Well, I decided to start my list simply, non-controversial, because often how we like our flavor savers is a matter of preference. But for my number 5, I'd like to think we can all agree. This mustache is notorious in both, like Simon and Simon, in both television and film because it shouldn't exist. I'm going with Cesar Romero's mustache as the Joker in the 1966 film Batman the movie.
Yep.
Jay, the Joker doesn't have a fucking mustache.
I know.
And look,
my God.
And I am not one of these neckbeard comic guys who really gives a shit about that kind of thing. But come on. Romero was known as the Latin lover, and he didn't want to shave his soup strainer because it was sort of his signature look, right? Rather than casting the role with an actor who was less obsessed with his stash, they just painted over it.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
Like that thing when you're painting the house in the summertime and a bug gets stuck in it and you just decide, fuck it, and paint right over the bug. That's what it looks like. It's ridiculous. And okay, I guess it kind of works for the campy factor of Batman 66, but it's still a pretty bullshit move. And part of me wonders if in 66 they figured that the image quality of the TV broadcast would just cover it up and maybe nobody would notice that Cesar Romero had a mustache, but on the big screen, and certainly in the light of our high-def world, it is a bottom 5 mustache situation.
Oh, that is awesome. You know, you made me remember, too, that DC is kind of known for this mustache cover-up business. Because in Justice League, they friggin' tried, they digitally removed a mustache during a reshoot with Henry Cavill's Superman. So, man, that could have been one too as well. But
it's in the Hall of Fame.
That's right. It's in the Hall of Fame, so it couldn't be on the list. But it's worth mentioning only because you just talked about a DC character. So
I didn't even
very
think of
cool.
that.
Very cool choice. I'm surprised that that's number 5. I can't wait to know what the rest is. That would have made a great number 1, quite honestly. Next, I'm going to go with a kind of obscure one for us on our show, because we typically don't go this far back into cinema history.
Sure.
But on a recent episode of the excellent podcast Faculty of Horror, which you, Mike, got me into, co-hosts Alex West and Andrea Subasati discussed the 1932 pre-code horror film Island of Lost Souls. This is a hell of an episode on one hell of a great podcast. So if you haven't turned into the fact yet, I highly recommend you do and give their deep dive into this flick a listen. And I point the listeners of our show to their show because I'm not going to talk about how the film was banned in several countries, nor will I go into depth about the contest held to find an actress to play Loda the Panther Woman. Instead, all you're going to get from me when chatting about this classic, disturbing, and wild adaptation of the H.G. Wells novel The Island of Dr. Moreau is Charles Laughton and his goddamn awful facial hair. Laughton, a well-known stage star at the time, was relatively new to screen acting, and Island was his second movie. Plays Dr. Moreau, the mad scientist whose experiments in evolution have led to an island populated by man-beasts that he controls with strict rules and a whip. Laughton plays the whole thing very big. But the biggest thing about his performance is his insane mustache-beard combo. Above his top lip is essentially 2 Hitler stashes under each nostril, which, depending on the scene, are either merged or separated under his septum. It's rumored that Laughton developed an aversion to hair in general after the film, as well as zoos. But I'm unsure of the validity of the rumor. Were that abomination on my face, I'd have shaved several times a day for the rest of my life to ensure it never appeared again. Number 4, The Island of Lost Souls, 1932.
Jay, I would let Alex and Andrea choose any version of a mustache for my face if it meant having them on our show.
This is how we're going to send up the flare. We're going to send it up.
Right. Yeah, I am also a huge fan of the Faculty of Horror, especially since getting to know Kay Lynch a little bit from Salem Horror Fest and seeing Alex and Andrea live in Salem a few times. You and I got to do that just this past spring, which was fabulous. I'm hoping to see them again in April of 2025. Yep, as always, they continue to teach us things because without them, you might have missed a really pretty bottom 5 stash. So
totally would have. Yes, exactly.
Class is always in session. My number 4 nose carpet is your fault.
I love it.
Yep, your fault. Not the stash itself, but the fact that it's on my list. Because were it not for you and for Film Jitsu, I never would have watched 1977's Death Game. And I never would have seen Seymour Cassell's giant, sweaty snot mop. Death Game, of course, would be the remade, almost 40 years later, Eli Roth film titled Knock Knock, that was reviewed by me on this show last year, because you're a son of a bitch and made me watch it. So I caught up with the original film, and not only does it not have a naked Ana de Armas in it, by the way, but it does have Seymour Cassell's signature stash, which takes up most of the real estate on his face, but is covered in literal blood, sweat, and tears the whole movie. Because this is about a man being systematically tortured by 2 psychopathic women with daddy issues, the kind of thing that is really gonzo. I'll tell you, after having seen Knock Knock, I cannot tell you how nihilistic 1977's Death Game is. What is not tame and what is not light is the amount of just like snot and tears and blood and food and every other nasty thing that gets stuck in this giant cookie catcher. I cannot get over it.
Oh, God.
The only thing more shocking than how gross this mouth merkin is might be the final shot of Death Game. I won't spoil it, but you've been warned. That's my number 4, all the same. The giant, disgusting mustache in 1977's Death Game.
Fantastic pick. I love so far that we haven't duplicated any picks. I was actually worried that we might. There's still, of course, 3 left for each of us, so I will now proceed with my number 3. You mentioned this actor already, and interestingly, the character that you mentioned was played by Charles Laughton on stage, and that would be Hercule Poirot from the various Agatha Christie stories portrayed in modern times by Kenneth Branagh. My number 3 pick was Kenneth Branagh.
Oh, really?
But it's not Hercule Poirot. It's actually a different movie. So in Dead Again from 1991, which is directed by Branagh as well as starring him in 2 roles. So figure that out. That's got to be tricky to do. Branagh plays this tempestuous composer, and this is in the black and white sequences within the film. And this stash that he has is ludicrous. It is a goatee. It's very Snidely Whiplash looking. But what's interesting, it's perhaps not as ridiculous as how Branagh looks in his modern day scenes. This movie's pretty wild, okay? He plays a modern day version of this character as a detective in LA. This is 1991, so the real 1991. So he's got the windswept hair, completely clear face, and he just looks so odd because they constantly are cutting back to the black and white version of him. So the black and white version, the past life, is this guy named Roman Strauss. He's this famous music composer. And then in the present day, he's known as Mike Church, and he's just sort of this loser, private detective type guy. And Emma Thompson then has her black and white character and her present day in color character. It's a very interesting film. It's very well put together. I don't want to say too much about the overall story, even though it is 35 years old or whatever it is. I don't want to blow anything because it's a great watch if you haven't seen it. That said, the contrast between the empty lip and the lip full of stash is so fucking jarring that you can't help but think when you're in the present day about the absence of the mustache. So in this case, the problem isn't necessarily that the stash is ridiculous, which it is, but more so that it draws so much extra attention to itself because it's missing from the actor later on. It's kind of like watching Burt Reynolds in Deliverance. You're just like, what the hell is going on here? You don't look right. In Deliverance, you've got the iconic Burt Reynolds in your head as like an idea. Here, you're flipping from scene to scene, and then you get back to the future, and you're like, nope. Obviously, they try to use this sort of evil goatee mustache combo to persuade the viewer in a certain direction. And again, I don't want to get into too much with that, but let's just say that there are some ideas that are subverted there. It's well worth the watch if you haven't seen it. 1991's Dead Again, Kenneth Branagh. Terrible lack of stash.
I like that your pick is actually the stash that isn't there. It's like
yes, yeah.
It's quite clever. You mentioned a minute ago about how sometimes the mustache is the message. That the facial hair is oftentimes intended to tell us something about the character. Sometimes it's machismo. Sometimes it's a frailty. You know, if it's kind of this little weak stash. Sometimes it's an evil twirling mustache, that Snidely Whiplash thing. I wanted to find a way to represent the shitty little smear that is the pencil mustache on my bottom 5. And at number 3, it's that line on the upper lip that usually tells us that a character is a fucking creep, right? That thin pencil mustache. Made most famous, of course, by director John Waters, the Prince of Puke, the Duke of Dirt, the Pope of Trash. He, of course, adopts all of those things intentionally as his signature look. It conveys instant sleaze. And while John Waters can pull that off, that is certainly not true of Mel Brooks's President Scroob in Spaceballs.
perfect. Yeah.
Hello, President Scroob.
Oh, hello, Charlene.
I'm Marlene.
Hello, Marlene.
I'm Charlene.
Chew your gum.
This mustache is like a grease paint smear running out of his nostrils in this Salvador Dali variant of the pencil mustache. It conveys instantly that this character is a dipshit. Anyone who would walk around looking like he had a snail trail on his upper lip is obviously the kind of sleazeball that would also try to steal all the fresh air from an entire planet. It's an intentionally bad stash that telegraphs everything you need to know about the guy. So because it's so effective at being a bad stash, it lands on my list at number 3.
Nice. No, that's great. I think what's funny about your choice is that it's very much the same kind of stash that I chose for my number 2. So I'm following right on the heels of your choice with my own. I could have just as well gone with any of the movies from this painfully awful series of vigilante justice flicks starring Charles Bronson. But considering this is the film that birthed Paul Kersey, a mild-mannered, socially liberal architect who becomes a gun-toting death dealer after criminals destroy his family, this seemed like the correct choice. It's a nasty flick, Death Wish, and the movie has a ton of issues when viewed with modern eyes. But you know what? None of those are as noticeable nor distracting as Bronson's goddamn upper lip, which looks like the hair was drawn on with a woman's eyebrow pencil, somehow hovering too high above his top lip and too low below his nose. It manages to also slope downward on either side, yet be finely manicured enough not to join in the middle, instead with little handles that point into the nostrils. And as I was writing this, a description of Charles Bronson's mustache, I suddenly realized just how utterly insane this entire endeavor is. That I've now spent hours comparing cinematic facial hair so that I could settle on one so bad that it demanded that I describe it in detail. There have been many moments in my life, Mike, where I've questioned the decisions that have led me to where I wound up. But fuck, I don't think I've ever fallen into as deep an existential well as I did while writing about Charles Bronson's nostrils. So I guess for that reason alone, I'd have this on my list. But also, it's an absolutely terrible looking mustache that perhaps thankfully fills out throughout the rest of the installments in the series until part 5, when it was resculpted to its original horrible shape, perhaps as like a back to its roots attempt by the filmmakers. I don't know. I'm just a guy wondering what he did with his life.
This says so much about the difference between you and me, because as you were torturing yourself writing about Charles Bronson's mustache in vivid detail, I was just sitting here thinking, I don't know, maybe I just call it like Downward Dali and call it good. That's
because you're succinct and I'm a moron.
No, I'm just kind of the idiot who comes up with stuff. Like, you're painstakingly thinking, and I'm just like, no. What if I just say something stupid? What, we could do that.
Because that's not stupid. That's witty. That's witty.
I'll tell you what is stupid. The fact that we have been doing a bad movie podcast and we have not done a Death Wish episode yet.
I know.
It's coming one of these days, right? It's
sooner or later.
It's got to.
It's got to.
My number 2, I guess this was the one that I considered. This was the one that upset me. Maybe this is the one where I sat for a minute and thought about, like, what is happening? Because Max von Sydow is a Hollywood legend.
Yeah.
Twice Oscar nominated, winner of 2 Golden Globes, 2 Primetime Emmys. He starred in films like The Seventh Seal, Wild Strawberries, The Exorcist. So what the fuck was he thinking with this racist-ass Fu Manchu as Ming the Merciless in Flash Gordon?
Oh, damn it. Why didn't I think of this one?
I honestly, this was the one I thought might be on both of our lists. There is so much wrong with this. There is so much wrong with the whole character. Just the whole character, first off.
Sure.
Ming the Merciless is coded as East Asian.
Yeah.
Max von Sydow is Swedish. And I mean, it's fucked in so many different ways, but I think the Fu Manchu is the thing that almost sort of perfectly encapsulates what's wrong with it. Like, you could probably write a very long, thoughtful paper about cultural appropriation and yellowface and all of that kind of stuff, and none of what you would write would be nearly as perfectly descriptive of the problem as just saying Fu Manchu. It's just kind of fucked, right? The whole thing is just fucked.
My number one is also a Fu Manchu.
Okay.
And it tops yours, but only by a hair.
Oh, fuck. Get out of here. Get out.
No. But seriously, I debated keeping this one off my list because it's a lot and likely would make for a decent full episode review, much like Flash Gordon would, to be perfectly honest. But ultimately, I decided it belonged here because we couldn't have a bottom 5 mustaches list and not have 1956's The Conqueror. The belief that John Wayne would make a convincing Mongolian warlord is, to put it mildly, a stretch. But veteran actor Dick Powell, who largely took the 50s off from acting to pursue directing and then promptly went back to acting, apparently believed that Wayne was the right man to play Temujin, the warrior that kidnaps a Tartar chieftain's daughter, starts a huge war over the situation, and after winning her over, slays his enemies and is anointed as Genghis Khan.
Notoriously racist as fuck is that movie. Wow.
Yes, exactly. And it seems that all the production team felt Wayne needed to play the first king of all Asia was the worst mustache that has likely ever been seen on film before or since. And now cinema history has infamous lines like this one, drawled out in Wayne's often imitated laconic style.
You do well, Kumlik. For while I have fingers to grasp a sword and eyes to see, your treacherous head is not safe on your shoulders, nor your daughter in her bed.
Good Lord. Of course, anytime The Conqueror comes up in discussion, you have to mention the macabre fact that it was shot in the Utah desert, some 140 or so miles downwind from nuclear test sites in Nevada.
Yeah.
Out of the 220 cast and crew members working on the picture, 91 of them were diagnosed with cancer, and 46 of those diagnosed ultimately succumbed to the disease, including Wayne and director Powell. This was among the last of the RKO pictures during Howard Hughes' tumultuous time as the studio head. Hughes is on record as saying the location choice for the film was the worst decision he ever made. But I'm inclined to believe that it might be letting Wayne be seen with that mustache, which is a smidge worse.
Yeah, okay. You know what? Most of the time, if you said this mustache is worse than 200 people having cancer, I would put up a fight. In this case, not so much. No.
Not so much.
No. Well, speaking of something that's happening, my number one. This falls into the category of, oops, I shaved my mustache. This happens all the time in movies. They shoot a film and then there are reshoots and then there's whatever, and actors have changed their hair or their facial hair or whatever there is. And sometimes the hair doesn't match and there's wigs and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot to choose from here. But my very favorite example of this is from a horror movie that I love, Sleepaway Camp. I love me some Sleepaway Camp. And I think one of the reasons is I caught this ages ago. Like, I saw Sleepaway Camp when I was a kid, and I caught it the first time I ever watched it because there is a cop in Sleepaway Camp who had shaved off his mustache and then couldn't grow it back in time. So if you watch the end of the movie, there's this cop who comes into the rec hall at the end and has this hilariously fake mustache, and they didn't do anything to try and hide the fact that it's a fake mustache. He's not like cop number 5 in the background. He's like the responding officer to this Sleepaway Camp massacre. And there are scenes where, and I won't spoil anything, but as you know, there are some pretty shocking images at the end of that movie, not even including the final shot, but even some moments leading up to that. And he gets this great moment where it's just a close-up of him looking shocked and stunned at what he sees. And the camera just holds at this like blank terrified, shocked look on his face. And there's like just a fucking construction paper mustache on the guy, pretty much. And it is so laughable and so ridiculous. And I don't know, again, if it was one of those things where they thought like maybe the camera would make up for it. In our high definition world, you can't disguise things anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was one of those things that they thought like, yeah, you know, we'll get away with it. They did not get away with it. And so it's, I think because this is one of those things that I didn't have to go digging for. It was,
right.
I've been laughing at this fake mustache since I was probably 14 years old. So it was the deadlock to make my number one. It might not be the best example of a bad movie mustache, but it's sort of the one I enjoy the most. And so that's why it's number one on my list.
Well done, sir.
Well, certainly I think, Jason, the only thing we can do as we wrap up this segment, I think, is promise our listeners that we will have images of all of these mustaches on the website at filmjitsu.net, because it's one thing to talk about them, but sometimes seeing is believing, and that is absolutely a bottom five mustache situation. So I think if I look at me just giving you homework.
Yeah, right. Just giving me more work. That's fine.
But if our listeners make their way over to filmjitsu.net, go to the episode. In the section for this week's episode, we will have photos of all of these mustaches for you to peruse and enjoy. And we would love to hear what you think the worst of the bunch is.
To the surprise of no one, on this mustache-fueled episode, I have decided to continue with the mustache theme for our Kick 2 Pick 2, but instead of talking about terrible mustaches, now we are going to talk about 4 absolutely amazing, incredible, cannot live without them bits of facial hair from cinema. Mike, I'm going to give you 4 stashes, and you can only keep 2.
Okay.
Here we go. The first one is Samuel L. Jackson's in Pulp Fiction. The second is Sean Connery's in The Untouchables. The third, Robert Shaw in Jaws. And number 4, Kurt the Man Russell in Tombstone. Yes, you lose not just the stash, but the movie itself.
Oh, there's a trick here. I see what you did. All right. So the stash is like the Horcrux that unlocks the whole thing.
Yep.
Oh, okay. That complicates things. That does, because for me, what initially my reaction was, can I close my eyes and see the stash? And I got to tell you,
right.
For me, I can't picture Sean Connery's stash in Untouchables right off the top of my head.
God.
And I love the movie, but I can't picture it like right off.
Holy shit. How do you not see it?
I don't know.
Incredible.
Okay. All right. I mean, I know that he's got one, but I guess
that's how you do it the Chicago way. Plus, it's Sean Connery, and I couldn't have this show without us saying, I must ask you a question.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. I see what you did there. Okay, so for me, I think that's going to be the one that I'm going to take out right away, just because it didn't hit me right up front as being
oh my god
a must-have mustache.
Okay. All right.
So
all right,
where are you at on this one?
I think that kicking the movie actually makes it a lot easier for me.
Okay.
So I think in this case I can kick Kurt Russell in Tombstone because I didn't like the movie that much. However, if we're just talking about mustaches here,
right,
could probably be the best one out of all of them.
Yeah.
But because I don't like the movie, I think I'll remove it. Yeah.
I'm fixated on the stash. You were fixated on the movie. That might serve us well for eliminating our first choice, but now shit gets real. Because I gotta tell you, Sam Jackson's mustache in Pulp Fiction, it's kind of a stash, beard, goatee whole situation.
It's a lot of mustache.
The sideburns are doing so much of the heavy lifting there, and
they are the whole thing. The Jerry curl, yeah.
I don't know if the stash alone is enough to win the day.
Yes, but you're getting rid of the film.
I know, which I don't want to do, but
right.
I mean, the stash alone might not be enough to save the movie.
For me, it is. I can tell you straight up.
Okay.
So I am going to lock in. Yes. Christ. Shit. No. Yes.
Here's my argument. We might be too tied up in the idea that the movie is connected because very obviously neither one of us is going to get rid of Jaws. It's one of our favorite movies, both you and I. It comes up a lot in the show. It's almost, no pun intended, untouchable. Yeah. And so I think I'm really going to have to focus on the stash. And the movie's going to have to be collateral for me in these decisions.
Okay, that's fine.
Because if it was based just on the movie, then I would keep Jaws and I would keep Pulp Fiction and that would be that. But that's not the challenge.
The challenge is the stash.
That's right. And so based on that, I would put forth that Kurt Russell's mustache in Tombstone is like the souped up steroids version of Robert Shaw's Jaws mustache.
It's a more impressive mustache, but it's a shitty movie. And I can't let a good mustache allow that movie to continue to exist when we are going to throw away Jaws because Robert Shaw's isn't as majestic as Kurt Russell's. So I think I've made my mind up because I think I just let go of The Untouchables by nominating Robert Shaw and Jaws. I think I just let go of The Untouchables.
I got mine. I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
All
here.
right.
Yep. I am going to keep Robert Shaw's mustache in Jaws and keep Jaws, not because of the movie. And I am going to keep Kurt Russell's stash in Tombstone because of the mustache and not because of the movie. I think for me, Sam Jackson's stash alone does not do enough of the heavy lifting. There's so much going on.
You're going to have to look in that picture again. You got to look in a picture of him.
I think if it was just the stash, though, it's an ensemble piece. It's an ensemble piece, is what it is, right? There's the stash is not the star of the show there, and so I'm gonna let that go. Any one of these is fucking outclassed by a mile by Sam Elliott's mustache in The Big Lebowski. So
I left it off the list intentionally. Great movie, great stash.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it for me. I'm going Robert Shaw and Kurt Russell.
And I'm going Robert Shaw and Samuel L. Jackson.
After all your fucking bitching, Sean Connery did not make your list.
Just couldn't do it. Just couldn't get rid of Sam Jackson.
Jason, it's the time of the show where I get to reveal what film you will be watching for our upcoming episode. Now, I was thinking a little bit about some of the directors we've been talking about lately, and what I discovered is that we've been on this never-ending quest to find increasingly impossible to pronounce director names. We will remember the notorious Nabu Papashadu incident from a couple episodes ago. Timur Bekmambetov, right? All of these kind of things that keep coming up. I don't know how you're going to talk about this movie without being able to mention the director's name. That's going to be half the struggle for you.
Okay.
Before we get into our Halloween episodes, which are just around the corner, we're going to make a pit stop with some notoriously catastrophic early 2000s action because, sir, for our next episode, you are going to be watching Ballistic X versus Sever.
Oh my God. Is it Sever or Seaver? I don't even know.
I will find out.
God, this is going to be the theme for this whole episode.
I don't know. But what I do know is that this movie is a hard watch. It is on the very short list of movies that I put on and turned off, which is not something I generally do. As a matter of fact, I know, because this movie came out in 2002. So I think I would have watched it on a VHS in my dorm, I'm pretty sure. It's about an FBI agent and a DEA or some kind of drug, I don't know, two fucking agents chasing each other around. None of it made sense to me then. It's probably not going to make sense to me now, but I do know what our bottom five is going to be. And I am a little surprised. I had to go back and check the tape here to make sure that we hadn't done it yet. But our bottom five is we are going to do our bottom five box office bombs because this movie failed gloriously.
I've avoided this for the better part of 20 some odd years, right? So here we go. I like Antonio Banderas. I like Lucy Liu. And what's funny about this one is because I like both of them, I've often wondered what went so horribly wrong with it. So I guess I'm about to find out. Until then, we were your hosts. I am Jay.
And I am Mike.
We'll see you next time.
Stalno mislim na te, hoću znat sve kate, vježbat ću sate i sate. Karate, vježbat ću dok zadnji mi kjaj zostane izađe.
That was a big argument.
That was a big argument.
It almost came to blows.
Is this where I'm supposed to insert a nose blowing sound effect? Oh.